Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I am Allie Marie. I am 28, soon to be 29 years old, and I chose to convert to Catholicism when I was 21 years old. So I'm coming up on a decade of being Catholic, which is really strange because I never thought I would be Catholic. And the honoring and praying to saints, like the whole idea of the communion of saints, was very foreign to me as I was raised Protestant in like a Reformed, kind of Calvinist, Christian Reformed way. And so I had to delve into what the communion of saints meant, how it was that that Catholics venerated Mary, and how all of that played in together it was like one of those pieces that I had to overcome when I was choosing Catholicism. A couple weeks back, I did a pretty big push for Patreon, and one of the levels, if you join, you get to have a Skype call with me, and I got to chat with a new patron, Bobby Chappa, who recommended that I do this video on prayer versus worshiping the saints. And, you know, there is such a distinct there are different definitions that play into this. And Josh over at Practical Theism, I'm going to link his video above, he just did a video this week. He released it Monday or Tuesday, but he did it on prayer versus worship. I'm like, wow, you know, I should really probably talk about this. It's a really important topic. It is something that a lot of people struggle with, myself included. And I really liked a lot of what both Bobby and Josh had to say about the differentiation between prayer and worship. And so I want to start just by saying definitions and interpretations are very difficult. So English is a super finicky language. My husband is currently studying to go back for his master's, and he is studying for the GMAT, which is a test that you have to take and pass in order to apply. And he struggles with English. It's just not one of his stronger things. And so we've been talking a bit about how complicated, you know, sentence structure and definitions all kind of are. And when we look at interpreting Greek to English, it doesn't always go smoothly. Even as simple as the word love, right? Like I can say, I love spaghetti. And somebody could look at me and say, oh my gosh, how could you possibly say that? You are only supposed to love your husband. How, like, that doesn't even make sense. And, you know, the words like honor and respect might come into a connotation with the word love in regard to a husband, but I don't necessarily honor and respect the spaghetti on my plate. So there are so many different definitions of love, and when we look at the Greek, we see different definitions, such as the agape love versus eros love, and we see that English has kind of simplified it down. I learned a word yesterday that was prattle, and that means to chatter in a simple-minded way. So I feel like English, you know, looking at like my review on 1984, looking at what George Orwell was attempting to communicate there about simplifying language to reduce people's ability to misinterpret what you're trying to say. You have good and ungood. It's not even good and bad. And so removing words, trying to simplify the language so that people don't think outside of what that word means, because it only means one thing and can only possibly mean one thing. So with that, Josh at Practical Theism brought something to my attention I had never heard of before, and so I delved deeper into it as well, and that was the different Greek words for worship, which are latria, dulia, and hyperdulia. And I had never heard of these words before, you know, and in the Protestant world, those words for love, the agape, eros, and there's a third one, that those play into what love means. So there are actually three words for worship as well. So latria is the sacrificial worship. It is the worship that is reserved for God alone. It means adoration. It is directed toward the Eucharist. It is a heightened sense. It is as different from dulia as the creator and the creature. So dulia means veneration or servitude. So, being a servant to. And St. Thomas Aquinas points out in Summa Theologia, by observance, we honor all those who excel in dignity. So dulia and hyperdulia are reserved for the saints. Hyperdulia is an extreme version of dulia, hyper, inflated, right? Excessive. And that's reserved pretty much solely for the Blessed Virgin Mary, for the Mother of God. So when we look at dulia versus latria, dulia has so much more to do with the saints. There's no sacrificial aspect when we ask saints to pray for us. We're basically, James talks about how the prayers of the faithful are heard, and we have this community that is unified with God that can pray for us, not as a mediator. So Josh had touched on the whole mediation deal. I want to touch on it in a different sense than he did. In 1 Timothy 2 verse 5, it says that there's one mediator between God and man, and that is Jesus Christ. So mediator in this sense it deals with salvation. It's not that we can only talk to Jesus. Otherwise, we wouldn't. We're human beings. We're built for community. Anyone who is a saint was human at some point. Christ himself became a human. And so in the, I utilize the study Bible. I really enjoy this book. So when we look at that, it says, a mediator brings together those who are separated, for extremes are united at a midpoint. Uniting men with God is the office of Christ, through whom men are reconciled to God. However, nothing forbids others from being called mediators, inasmuch as they cooperate in uniting men with God by directing their way or their ministerial actions, which is also St. Thomas Aquinas with Summa Theologia. So we have Jesus who offers us salvation. I have not once ever heard somebody ask saints into their heart to bring them to heaven. I have not once heard anybody Protestant, Catholic alike, in the Protestant world, we give our lives to Christ, right? We say the prayer. We say, Jesus, enter my heart, enter my life. I'm sorry for this life that I've led. We don't apologize to saints. That is not something that is in the nature of our asking to saints. Josh points out that in Old English, to pray simply means to ask. And, it's a solemn request for help or an expression of thanks. Whereas, worship is the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration for a deity. So when we are praying, prayer and worship are not synonymous. And that's a point that Bobby really felt was so imperative to make, which is true because they aren't the same thing. Just as, love isn't the same as pizza and husband. Those are two different words. They aren't synonymous, and they're even the same word. Prayer and worship have very different roots. Worship means worthy. We honor a lot of people, and one of the examples that Bobby used that I really, really liked was the fact that all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. So a rectangle, by definition, is a quadrilateral. It is a parallelogram with 4 sides and 4 right angles. So a square is simply a square rectangle. It is not an oblong rectangle. So all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, because a square has to have 4 equal sides. So worship, prayer can be worship. There are forms of prayer that are, directed toward God. Worship in the sense of the latria, which is the sacrificial worship, and there can be sacrificial prayer, such as fasting. I have never heard of somebody fasting for a saint. There's just this huge differentiation between how Catholics respect and venerate God, and then, which is that latria. Then there's the hyperdulia. There's a different way that we honor and respect the Mother of God, or Blessed Virgin Mary. And then into dulia itself, there is a totally separate way that we view and honor the saints. Just as there's a different way that I love my husband, there is a different way that I love spaghetti, and then there might be a different way that, I love my comforter. They all serve different purposes, and they all serve in a way that it's this thing means a lot to me. It pleases me. You know, love means it's like it brings pleasure. And so there are different levels of that, just as there are different levels of worship, and prayer is separate from that. There, like I said, there can be sacrificial prayer, but and within that, you know, just like the whole all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. We can pray and not be worshiping. We can bow and not be worshiping. You know, you look at several cultures, Japanese culture, any culture, you know, you come up and you bow. Now, there are some instances, such as in yoga, where you come up to someone and you'd say, namaste. And, you know, namaste means the God in me greets the God in you. There are certain levels of bowing that are given a supernatural intention. But Catholicism does teach that movements like body postures in and of themselves do not hold an inherent supernatural value. I've done an entire video on yoga in that regard. And so, but it's just really important to note that we can, you know, iconoclasm is a huge thing in the 8th century when it all came around and people were talking about it. There were several different saints and Catholic leaders that were speaking about how different it is, how we honor like the statues. There's a whole another Greek word for that. I couldn't even try to pronounce it. But it also comes down to how it's interpreted to English. And that's why when we start reading the Bibles, when we start looking at, you know, what one does the church use? You know, it's the New American Standard Bible, the NAB, and or the Revised Standard Version, Catholic edition. That's the one I use. When we start looking at these interpretations of the Bible, it's so important to be using reading the ones that are closest to direct interpretation, because once you start getting into the Message Bible, where it's all just reformulated so that it's easier to read, it's very easy for that to be construed and interpreted as what the original Bible stated, which, I mean, in the Old Testament, when they used to, I learned this back in high school, I went to a private school, when they used to copy down the Old Testament and they would write it on a new scroll, if a single letter got messed up, they had to throw that scroll away and start over, because it had to be an exact replica of what the original was, and there could be no mistakes. So it was so important that every single letter maintained its integrity. And so when we start using different interpretations of the Bible, we want to use this one because it's so much easier to understand. And I would just really encourage you, especially if this is a part of the Catholic faith that you are struggling with, to look at the roots, look at the original Greek words, see how different Christian scholars interpret those words. Because, you know, you can look at something like dulia and then see, like, it means adoration, or it means bow, or it means this, or that, or this, or that. And so English is just a really complicated language. But I would just encourage you to look at the fact that prayer and worship, they're just not synonymous. The Catholic Church does not teach them as synonymous. They aren't taught as synonymous in the Bible itself. You know, when we start talking about Jesus as the mediator, you look forward even further in Hebrews, you know, I think it's 9 verse 15. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. So, and then it talks, what's it going to say? Since a death has occurred which redeems them from the transgressions under the first covenant. So the first covenant being the covenant at Mount Sinai, where all the Levitical laws were given to Moses and they had to follow all of these extremes. And now suddenly that's all abolished because Christ is now the new mediator and it's not this book of laws. So while the Catholic Church, you know, still holds that grace works in our in our lives, in our souls, and it produces good works, which is edified all throughout the New Testament. It's a whole different topic in and of itself. But Christ is that mediator in the fact that our salvation, our eternal inheritance, as stated in Hebrews 9 verse 15, it no longer lies in having to sacrifice a lamb every year. It no longer lies in the Passover. It lies within Christ. That is who our salvation is from. But that doesn't mean that I can't ask my mom or my husband or any of you or a saint in heaven to pray for me as I am like about to go into labor, you know, or to pray for all of us to be praying for Lebanon right now. There is nothing inherently wrong with that, but we're mediating on behalf of each other, not for salvation, but that we might, you know, experience peace, or that we might be able to work through destruction, you know, speaking on the explosion in Lebanon. There is just a lot that goes into prayer, and it's not worship. It's simply, the Old English is to ask. We're simply bringing a request and saying, hey, St. Anthony, I can't find my book. Can you please help me find it? It's as simple as that. That's, and St. Anthony to the rescue, and could I ask Jesus? I don't know, but it's just the same as if I was going to ask Alec, like, should I not ask Alec where my book is and say, oh, Jesus, help me find my book? Like, I can also, like, if I'm by myself, they're patron saints for different items, and you can Google that, and they're coming upon their patronage, and everything else is just another topic in and of itself. But yeah, so that's just what I really want to talk about today. I just want to like show my appreciation for Bobby for talking about this in the first place, and then Josh, thanks so much for posting your video too, because that really led to a new level of insight that I hadn't personally had before, and so I just wanted to be able to share that further, and I hope that this has been condensed and like straightforward enough for you. And if you have any other questions, feel free to message me, comment below. I'll be engaged for a little while here, and yeah, I look forward to chatting with you. But I pray that God is able to grant you the resources that you need in order to draw closer to Him and to those around you, and I pray that you are able to make it a great day. See, I'm praying for you. I'm mediating on your behalf. Don't be scared of it. God bless.